Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Pensions Committee. So my name is Armin Mahboob, Councillor Armin Mahboob. I'm the chair of the Pensions Committee and Board. Please note that this meeting is recorded by the Council for live and subsequent broadcasts via the Council's intranet site. I think we've done introductions before, so that won't be needed at this point. And just to note, we are quorum in this meeting. So for apologies, I record apologies from Councillor White, Councillor Da Costa, and Ismail Owarish. Currently, there is no urgent business. And moving on to declarations of interest, are any members, do any members have any declarations of interest? No? So there are no declarations of interest. So moving on, there are no deputations or, yeah, there are no deputations. Can I ask, do members have any training to report? John?
Can I just ask, I've emailed my training things I attend to, but we haven't had any minutes. I can't remember when we had the last lot of minutes, so I'm just concerned my submission is getting lost or.
Got him.
Yeah, I'll just confirm who you're sending those to, Councillor Bevan, and if you could send across to us. Are there no meetings?
Minutes we'll get on to in the next agenda point. Yeah. So to pass on the minutes, that's
yeah. So I know I was here for the last meeting, but we do have someone in training who is actually doing the minutes. I can tell you that on the draft version of minutes, your training has been recorded, Councillor Bevan. I can definitely confirm that. Oh, but they will have to come to the next meeting, the official minutes.
Amazing, thank you. Is there any other training to record? Nope. And I just mentioned with item 7, the minutes will be coming to the next meeting. So going swiftly on to item 8, can I pass you over to Tim, which I'm guessing will be passed off to Jamie subsequently. Oh, just straight to Jamie then.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. So I'm going to go through the agenda item 8, the pension administration update. So there's 4 items to update you on this evening. Got the pension fund membership update, the online member self-service portal update, and the update on McLeod project, and the update on the annual benefit statements. So first on the membership update, there's not been a huge change in membership numbers between 31st of March 23 and June 23. The main difference is on the active members, which are down to a large retirement and a later cleanse that we've been doing for the annual benefit statements, which I'll cover a bit later on. Moving on to the online member self-service portal update on the number of active members who have signed up to the portal. As you can see, again, it's steadily increasing with a slight rise again. We're hoping that in the next update for the end of September, this number would again rise with the kind of work the team is doing around the trying to push member towards the member self-service portal, along with the annual benefit statement work, which again I'll cover in more detail in a bit. Section 6.5 shows the members who access their member self-service portal in the last 7 days, 30 days, 2 months, and 3 months. And I'll move on to section 6.6, update on the McLeod remedy. So the government consultation closed at the end of June, and the government hoping to finalise the regulations in early September before they come into force on the 1st of October 23. There are plans to establish guidance working group with the LGPS Scheme Advisory Board sub and to consider what guidance is required. So starting from the 1st of October, the remedy regulation will be implemented, which means that the scheme will be required to begin recalculating benefits for the affected members in line with the McLeod guidelines, and we will be contacting all affected members in relation to that. So in preparation ahead of the 1st of October, the team have been doing like some preliminary work, and that is basically identifying which member will be affected ahead of the date, so I'll get ahead of the curve. To date, we've had about 60% of employers respond to the data gathering exercise. With the other 40% we haven't had a response to, there is guidance around how we treat those members and what we'll do to action them for the remedy. So we do anticipate that the implementation of the remedy will be quite complex and time consuming, and additional resources are likely to be required to undertake this work. But we will continue to provide updates to the committee and board on any developments related to the McLeod remedy and any additional resources needed. But at the moment, we're not entirely sure what that will be, given the fact that the guidance hasn't been released yet and we haven't kind of understood the full scope that would be required. Are there any questions on McLeod?
Councillor Ngaran first, and then we'll go over to.
Thank you, Jamie. I just want to know if there's any early indication as to what impact this will have on our pension fund, the McLeod.
So initial thoughts on the actual impact is quite small. So we don't expect many members to be affected by the McLeod remedy. And that's purely because what it is doing is comparing the post-14 care scheme to this old 60th scheme. And if a member who would be better off in the 60th scheme as opposed to the 49th scheme, they'll get that underpin protection that's been rolled out to everyone. Where the care scheme being 149th is a much better kind of factor compared to 160th, a member would have to have quite significant pay rises in the last 2-3 years to be kind of eligible for that protection. And again, we don't have many in that scope, we don't see, so not a huge impact.
Randy?
Just on a point of clarification, so for the 40% that you haven't made any contact with, what's likely to happen and what do you intend to do to contact those people?
So in the guidance, so basically the data we requested from the employers was the hours and pay and any breaks in service. And that's because under the pre-14 regulations, the pension was calculated by the service of the member, times their final pay, times 1/60th as a factor. But then that changed from the 1st of April 2014 to a care scheme where it's the member's earning for that year, times 1/49th, times the revaluation factor, which is normally the CPI factor. So service will no longer use a part of the equation. So from the 1st of April 2014, schemes stopped collecting that data, but then we now need that data to make the comparison between the two pension schemes. So to answer your question, for those 40% we haven't got, the guidance recommends that we do kind of assumptions. So for example, if we know that a member had earned 10K for that financial year, but their full-time equivalent 20K, it's safe to assume they're working half hours. And that's what we're going to do. Look at those 40% of the records we don't have a response for, is to make assumption based on the data we do have to know what we should do for that person in terms of implementation.
So I think one point to just add, which I think is included in the report, is the final guidance is actually not been issued yet. What we do know is the government plans on it being implemented from the 1st of October. So between this meeting and the 1st of October, we're expecting or that question basically to be outlined in guidance. And what Jamie and the team will do will be implementing that. We're working with our software manager, Awote. They'll build in a module within the framework of the system. The team will get trained on it, and then that work will go underway. But yeah, in terms of those 40% that's missing, it's not a big problem. It's just basically the government has already recognized that that's an issue. And in fact, just talking to colleagues across local authorities, hiring is much advanced in terms of getting that information. Others are actually really struggling for many reasons. Some of the employers would have left the scheme many years ago. They probably don't exist as business entities. So it's very impossible or very difficult to get 100% return on that type of request.
And because it's preliminary work, is there kind of an opportunity to increase that 60% at all? Or is that it?
Yeah, it's still time to increase it. We are still kind of chasing employers for responses. So it's not a full 60%. We're going to try to bump it up in the meantime.
Yes, I think when Jamie started, it was around 15%. So there's been quite a great deal of accelerating since then.
Is there any other questions regarding this item? Councillor Ngaran?
Another one, Jamie, not about the McLeod, but about the self-service portal. I just want to know, I see the numbers here. Do you think this is better than last 6 months ago. I just want to have an idea how many of the members are actually using the self-service portal and if there's any feedback as to how it's going.
Yeah, I think it's a massive improvement. I think when we first started work on it, I think it was around 8% uptake. So from 8% to 17.4, really huge improvement. And like I said, we are trying to kind of signpost members to member self-service. So if they come to the section and ask for an estimate, we try to like advise them they can do it themselves online to make them more kind of self-sufficient and kind of handle their own pension better.
Councillor Bevan.
I just wondered at the next meeting, could we have the self-service portal on the screen and you run through someone's inquired about a pension or a lump sum, or just do a sort of test examples to show us? Because it's a website, isn't it? So I've never seen it. So I think it'd be interesting for us to see how a member would actually do it and what information they'd have to put in and what they can get from it.
Yeah, so no, we're happy to provide a demo. We'll probably suggest that happen in an investment and governance workgroup session, because some of the content you see or there might be a bit more confidential, but also allow us to provide the training, because we do provide that to members when they first join in terms of what you can see and how you can run the different estimates. For example, I'm sure Jamie will be happy to lead on that, but I'll just suggest that we do that in that session rather than this meeting. That's okay.
Is there any other question from the committee regarding this report? Can we note this report as read? Yep. Amazing. Moving on to item 9. So I see that this item is also listed under the exempt item. So all that we'll be discussing is the pages 5 to 8. Tim, you're the lead officer for this, but I do know it's the independent advisor's report. So I don't know if you want to introduce it or if we go straight to John.
No, it is my report, so I'm happy to introduce it. And John is obviously always welcome to come in particulars because it's got a report attached to it. What I would say is I think the particular report was missing from the pack. So I don't know whether members have received a supplementary pack, which includes the actual report.
So do members have it? I have a spare if members need one.
Yeah, I didn't want to say much about this report. It's self-explanatory. The quarter was, I think, positive for markets. I think it was particularly driven as per normal by the United States. The fact that the US solved their debt ceiling problem yet again. The standoff in Congress was resolved at the last minute, as it has been a number of occasions. So the United States didn't default. Markets were very wary that they might. Everyone knew they wouldn't ultimately. I think that held markets back. But then later in the quarter, they agreed that. There was also the fact that headline inflation came down. For some reason, markets seem to take a great note of headline inflation as opposed to underlying inflation, which is actually the more important one. This seems to move markets. Headline inflation came down, particularly in the US, seemed to benefit markets. The only other thing I'd say in this report is on page 2, there was a banking crisis or a continuation of the banking crisis that we saw earlier in the year. You remember earlier in the year, Credit Suisse had to amalgamate UBS in Switzerland, and there were a couple of banking failures in the United States. There was another banking failure that I refer to here at the beginning of May, when the California regulators again had to step in, and a bank called First Republic was sold. Most of its assets taken over. JP Morgan was the third significant banking failure in the US this year, the second biggest in US history. But you know what? It hardly moved markets. And what I think that shows is that following the great financial crisis of 2008, when we remember that banks like Bear Stearns, particularly Lehman Brothers, I think everyone still remembers people carrying their stuff out of the offices in cardboard boxes. It hasn't happened again. So I think it shows that in the United States and in Europe, the regulation that was brought into banking after 2008 has worked. Because if it hadn't, we would have had another banking crisis, and we've not had one. That's all I'd like to say. Thank you.
Tim, do you want to continue with your report?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, John, for the economic background to that report. So yeah, just again to confirm to members, this is agenda item 9, and I'm going through the supplementary report that was just shared shortly. So again, it is a standing report that we bring to this Pensions Committee and Board every quarter. It just outlines the investment performance and also the general performance of the scheme over the last 3 months. The key thing to highlight is again the value of the investment portfolio, which is now 1.7 billion. That was a modest improvement over the quarter of about 32 basis points. It's obviously important to note that it underperformed the benchmark, but that wasn't by a meaningful amount. So in section 6.3, we show the performance over longer time periods, going on to 5 years. So it just again shows the investment performance for the fund. Also, I'll mention at this point that there is an appendix that has got this in more detail. That's in the exam session. So if there are any questions with regards to investment performance, particularly from that appendix, I'll be happy to cover those again in the exam session of the meeting. Moving on to asset allocation, again, just to highlight to members that asset allocation that's shown in the chart over the last year or so. The key thing to point out is our equity holdings are increasing in terms of their share of the portfolio. That's mainly due to market performance across the different sectors in the portfolio. So it's not necessarily to do with any decision that's been made, but it might be something we might want to keep an eye on. In section 6.7, I have included a table that's got the allowable ranges that we've included in our investment strategy. When the assets breach between the above those levels, there is a delegated authority for us as officers to rebalance the portfolio on behalf of the fund. But again, just to remind members that it is your decision. If you do feel that the asset allocation at the moment in time is a bit higher than you'd like, again, the recommendation can be made for us to do something different in terms of rebalancing. The key thing to point out is there is no urgent need for us to do so unless explicitly suggested by members of the Pensions Committee and Board. Again, in section 6.8, it's just highlighting the illiquid assets and the variation in those asset classes. The key thing to note about this is different funds will come to, will be calling on their capital distribution or funding requirements over time. So particularly the renewable infrastructure is currently underweight, but that's mainly because we've not filled up the allocation that we've signed up to. So over time, we'd expect that to continue to increase. Going on to the London Civ update, again, not much has changed. Just to note to members that the pension fund currently has about 76 assets pooled with the pool and 20 directly in their invested funds. The next update is on the funding position update for the fund, which I'm sure members would have read with interest. So at the March 2022 valuation, which is the big valuation that's carried out by the actuary.
Sorry, Tim, could I ask you to say which page you're on? Otherwise, it's very, yeah, I know that it's very difficult to follow unless you tell us where you are.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'll revert to going to pages. I've sort of been going in sections, but I'm on page 4 of the supplementary pack. I think it was a separate pack that was sent around, so it's a hard copy paper. I'm not sure if it's been provided online as well to members. Am I okay to continue? Yeah. Okay. So yeah, on page 4, section 6.12 is essentially discussing the funding position of the fund. So at the March 31st valuation that the actuary undertook, the funding level was 113% for the pension fund. In between valuations, the actuary can adjust their valuation or their assumptions based on the prevailing market conditions, which they have done so over the first quarter. I think last meeting we provided an update, and we've got a further update again, which is in the confidential pack. The key thing to highlight at the moment is the updated funding position based on those revised assumptions is now 143%. Again, there is a detailed pack that I'm happy to discuss in the exam part of the agenda in terms of the implications of that or some of the thinking around how we've come to that valuation. So if that's okay, Chair, I think those were the key things I would like to highlight, but I'm happy to open it up for member questions.
So we'll start with Councillor Ngaram.
I think Keith has always asked this question about the funding level position. 143%, does that mean there's room to reduce the amount members put in, given that it's a cost of living crisis? I'm just putting out there. I'm just asking that question. I just want to know what your thoughts are about that.
Yes, so I think in the actuals report, the key driver behind this is a key assumption they've changed in regards to the discount rate. And that's been primarily driven by the increase in interest rates by Bank of England. And that's a key input into how they assess what the discount rate should be, which is essentially the rate we expect for return over the investment horizon. Now, the interesting thing is this is just an update to the valuation. They haven't had a look at all the employers in the fund. They haven't gone into the details about the membership breakdown. So that's what they'll do in the actuarial evaluation, which is more detailed, and that's what their contribution rates are set against. This is meant to be a measure for the committee and board to assess on a regular basis to see how we are performing against that liability. So in many ways, this may, to some degree, influence our investment decision making. But it doesn't have the impact on the funding, on the contributions that employers and employees will pay at this time. So again, when we get to that area, I'm happy to sort of discuss that in detail. But one of the key things is members may want to think around what that valuation means and whether we want to bring in Heijmans for another explanation. I think they did explain at the last meeting, but I'm conscious other members were not here, where they did talk into their thinking around how they come up with that number.
See why our improvement occurs, because interest rates rise now against liabilities 30 years into the future. You can see why I think this is not a perfect measure what's actually going on. And when we were in like 70% funded, I remember when I joined, I was arguing that there wasn't a massive deficit that needed to be, recorded in the Sun every day, and I don't think 130 surplus it's particularly dramatic anyway. I think if you get to like 200, then you might want to seriously address the funding level, because you're getting maybe too much money coming from the contributions. But I don't think we're outside what I would consider, one standard deviation code.
Yes, and maybe just another to add to that point as well is because the driver behind this is this market environment we've just found ourselves over the last maybe 18 months. If that were to reverse, then you'd expect the liability to perform in a similar way. So that 143 could reduce rather dramatically. So again, that's why contribution rates are set through this more drawn out process where you look at more details and make more considered assumption. This is just to compare whether our investment strategy is still fit for purpose or if we want to do anything different.
Is there any other questions from the committee? Yeah, God, Keith.
We're getting it in. We're trying to make it simpler, because essentially when Tim uses that benchmark there, it's a pretty meaningless benchmark. We haven't got anything better yet. All right. That benchmark is almost self-serving, because it's a benchmark relative to the different assets that you already have. So you'd expect it to be pretty much in line with that. Whereas, a more dramatic area I just put the numbers down. So for the year to date, for example, we're showing 2.7 index. This index is 4.7. If we were in the World Equity Index, just passive, we'd have had 8.1. So that's quite dramatic. So that would have been good. On the other hand, if we'd have been in bonds, we'd have been minus 3.8. So you got to be careful about these. Our job is not to outperform the index per se. It's about having a set of sensible investments which will meet the objectives that we need and are properly diversified. One thing I'm concerned about, though, is that our lack of review of investment strategy, because really over the last few years, this is not something you want to do every day, but over the last few years, we've had some quite dramatic moves of the US market relative to other markets. You've had a dramatic move of so-called growth stocks versus value stocks. Value stocks, for example, have a much better yield on them, and we might want to consider whether we should increase the yield thing. I'm not suggesting we do anything other than passive, but you can do all of these things in a passive way. Emerging markets have underperformed dramatically. Europe has been very, very strong in the last year. It's probably been overall the best performing market in. I put all my numbers in sterling. I see you have to be a wizard at foreign exchange with John's paper, which has some in yen, some in yen.
That's right, doing it in local currencies.
Well, yeah, no, I can see the point of doing that, but I bring it all into sterling. And I think it's, and what we did was, remember when we indexed, we didn't index on the world index. We indexed on you separately, which means if you're in the world index, you're making automatic adjustments over time, because as things outperform, they get bigger or they get smaller, and you make adjustments to it. Sometimes you want to actually offset that and put some kind of a tilt on the portfolio with another passive investment. So I just think that ought to be reviewed at some point, and that's hard to do, and it's hard to do initially with the consultants there, for example, because again, it's like they're marking their own homework, but we want their advice. You want their advice separately, but we want to discuss their input as part of what we're doing overall. So I think there ought to be an opportunity to do that.
Yeah, a couple comments. I think the mic's there. Thank you. Yeah, so just a couple comments. I think that's very helpful feedback. One of the things that we have set up is the investment and governance working group, and that is the intended purpose to be able to discuss those things. So I'm conscious we've had a couple sessions, but we're planning a few more. So for in the autumn, in consultation with the chair, we'll be planning another session. Again, if there are particular areas that members find to be quite compelling that they want us to review, will be helpful for us in our plans. One of the areas where I definitely think that the fund needs to consider would be in our fixed income strategies. Given where yields are, I think there's some attractive opportunities in that, and we should probably delve into a lot more detail on how we can structure our fund. And you're right to point out that we will need that advice from Mercer in terms of what the asset allocation switch could be, but it'll be good to discuss that and get some sense from members around those opportunities and how quickly we can act on them, given the market that we're in. So yeah, we are planning on continuing those sessions, and I'll welcome any feedback to make them more helpful for members as well.
Okay, moving on to item 10 then, Tim, it's your again.
Right, so I think we're back to the main agenda pack on item 10, which will be page 9. So this is the pension fund's annual draft report. So yeah, I won't go through this report line by line. I'll just sort of lay out the context of what the report is presenting to members. So there is a requirement in legislation that the Pensions Committee and Board, I think this is in line with our constitution as well, but the legislation said that administering authorities must approve an annual pension fund accounts and annual report each year before the final version is published. So this report essentially presents that report to you for the year 2022 to 2023. It is attached in the appendix. It's a long report. I won't go through it in line, but I'll welcome any comments from members around the contents of that report. So essentially, the recommendation that we are asking for members is to approve the draft version so we can upload it onto the website. And the reason for that, I think we've discussed this many times in the past, is there is some delay in the audit of pension fund accounts that has been going on for some time. Unfortunately, I can't provide any more better feedback than the fact that this is still going on as long for a while now. We do understand that the government is looking at a potential solution and it's consulting on that solution. But once that's made a lot clearer, again, we'll come to this Pensions Committee and Board and provide an update. So we still have a number of years that are outstanding in terms of our audits. I think it goes back to 2020, 2021 now, so almost 3 years outstanding. But the information that we include in here is relatively straightforward. We obviously, in preparing it, take our time. We believe the information is accurate. We need the auditor to go through that information to confirm that what we've put in is indeed accurate. However, the Scheme Advisory Board is also tasked with doing a report for the entire LGPS scheme, so the other 86 funds or the administrative authority. This really helps them be able to paint a picture on how well the scheme is performing, its growth, its membership, and details like that. So that's also set out in their guidance as to how we can prepare this report. So this report follows the guidance that's been issued out by the Scheme Advisory Board in accordance with CIPFA regulations. So essentially what we're asking the members is for you to take an opportunity to read the report. We do have a deadline to publish this by the 1st of December. So the next meeting will be after that deadline. So once you read the report, provided some comments, if you're happy for us to upload that as a draft version onto the pension fund's website. Once we've completed the audits or once a solution has been found, then we will again return to this committee and board with the final audited version for you to approve once more and highlight any key changes if there are. So this is just a note to you that we are also doing our best to still try and keep to the requirements, but unfortunately there are other factors that mean that this is not a perfect report, but it's a good enough report to be put in the public domain.
Thanks, Tim. So who prepared the report?
So the report is prepared by the pensions accounting team. So we have a team in Haringey that goes through the report and prepares it, does the accounting and all that stuff.
So BDO or Mazars, they're not involved at all?
No, so BDO would audit it. So the responsibility to prepare it remains with the administering authority. So in our case, it's the pensions accounting team. We are responsible for not only preparing the accounts, but also managing the day-to-day of the pension fund. So we prepared this report to evidence, as an evidence of that work, almost a summary of how we've managed to keep those controls in place over the year. The external auditor then goes through to make sure that we have indeed complied with the accounting rules. So that's the bit that they come in part of this process, and that's where the delay is. So in many ways, we've done the bit where we've put it out there for public inspection and we're just waiting for someone to go through it. And sometimes they do point out some discrepancies, which we can agree with or not agree with. That will be part of their audit report. But in a whole, they give you assurance that indeed what we've put in the report is in line with the rules and the guidance. So I think that's the bit that's missing.
Okay, so just what is the governance process around validating the accuracy of the report then?
So the governance process would prepare the report. There is a period of time where you're supposed to put that report up for public inspection. So anyone in public can essentially Google on the website and find out where that report is. That period is normally supposed to last about 30 days, at which point we go into an external audit process. And in between that, we produce this draft that comes to this committee to approve it. And then the auditor will do another update, which they can present to this committee as well and provide any updates on their key findings from the work. Once they have given us the opinion, which you'd hope is a positive opinion, then it will come again to this committee and board and we'll upload it onto the website. So the governance process does involve the auditor needing to inform you on what their key findings are. And yeah, some of those things will be around our own management controls, but also on how whether the numbers actually add up to what we have in our systems.
But on the so I get the external auditor review, but from an internal perspective within your own teams, is that what testing is done on the accuracy of the numbers? And if there is none, that's fine. If we're relying on the auditors, I just want to understand. So this is your team's own work. I just want to understand from our own perspective what testing is done internally for the accuracy.
So is this internally on this report?
Yeah.
So it is drafted. It goes through myself to review it. It goes through senior management in the organization to review it. It's also included in our final accounts team, especially the accounts part of it, which is probably the most key part of this report. That also goes through an accounting team that then publishes it. So there's a number of teams in place that prepare it for it to end up in the state. And then you're almost an additional check to make sure that whatever's been prepared is accurate. And then the auditor is another additional check. And then at that point, you can satisfy yourself that the report shows the true and fair value of how the authority has been managed.
Okay. So thank you for that, Tim. You and I have exchanged emails on the issue with regarding auditors. I know that we're not alone in the challenges we face, but I don't think it's tenable for us year after year to keep saying we don't have audited financial statements. And I think we need a plan B. And if that is, I don't know what plan B is, but every year, it could continue ad infinitum. We keep saying there's a problem with the industry. We don't have audited financial statements. And so we need plan B. And so if that's commissioning, sorry, Councillor Bevan, over to you.
Sure, Councillor.
On that point about auditors, I've raised this before. I feel that the council and local government should be making an official complaint to whoever regulates auditors together. And I got a kickback from some council officer. Oh, we can't complain about ourselves not having an audit. Oh, that wasn't the point I was making. The audit profession is regulated. Local councils or the LAG or whatever should be making an official complaint that that industry is failing to do what it's supposed to do. We shouldn't just be sitting here every year. Oh, we're now 3 years audits missing. It's outrageous. We should be making a complaint as a sector to the relevant regulator or the Bank of England or the Prime Minister, whoever. I don't think we should just sit back and say, oh, the industry's in a mess. You know, I know that's a bit divorced in this report, but that's my.
So to conclude, I think we need plan B. I think the auditing industry is huge. The asset management industry is huge. It must be within the realm of possibility that we can commission some kind of exam, test, review of whatever particular element we think is most vulnerable to give us as a committee some kind of comfort that whilst the industry sorts itself out, we're dealing with, you know, accurate financial statements. Thank you.
Josephine, do you want to go first, then Tim?
Yeah, just to provide a little bit of confidence, this has been escalated at a kind of a London level. So Society for London Treasurers have escalated this issue regarding the lack of audit. I think our actual external auditors at BDO, I think they're experiencing more of a backlog created via COVID. They do have difficulty recruiting auditors, and I believe that some of their resources was focused on NHS audits over this summer. So the escalation is in hand. The Section 151 is having discussions on a kind of wider London scale. From what we've been given early indication that we are hoping that this autumn, so sometime in October, we're hoping that our external auditors do come in to commence the 2021 audit. As Tim said, there is a backlog up until that year. And the view is that the 21-22 will not be commenced earliest is 2024. So we are significantly behind, unfortunately. We have escalated it, but we are in the hands of external auditors and actually for it being escalated by government.
I'm not happy. I think the industry should be fined some huge sum of money for failing to deliver what it's supposed to deliver by whoever regulates them, like the Financial Conduct Authority fines some banks or some companies substantial sums, millions and millions of pounds. They've done some fines recently. I can't remember them now, but I think this should be being done to the audit industry. We shouldn't be sitting back here getting more and more delayed, and you're making your representations, which I'm sure I'm not quite sure how much effect they're having, but you know, I think if the industry got fined 5 million per company, or our ones, we made a claim against our auditors, 5 million quid, you're causing us all this hassle and God knows what else.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, it's been made clear. Sorry, my phone. Apologies. It has been made clear to our external auditors in terms of being given specific deadlines of which they need to do that by. But obviously the deadlines I've just told you is not necessarily great news for us, but they have been given clarity that they need to get these audits done within the next couple of years.
Can we just go to Councillor Hymas before coming to you, Tim?
If, you know, worse comes to worse and we do find some significant discrepancies when the audit finally does happen, obviously the fact that it hasn't been done for 2 years is going to worsen the impact of that. So have you got in place mitigations if that is the case?
Yeah, I mean, So I'll probably start by saying that I share the same frustrations with you all. And as Josephine has mentioned, in the organization, we have been doing many things to accelerate this. So especially when you say plan B, I think we're probably on to like plan H or something now at this point. So there has been different levels of escalation. Unfortunately, the way that public sector audits are conducted, there's an organization called the PSSA. It appoints the auditor, and the auditor is then supposed to do the audit on behalf of the firms. I mean, John might be able to provide more context on this, on when this was set up, because I think it's a relatively new arrangement. So effectively what that means is every so often, the PSSA will appoint an auditor. So we've had BDO for coming up to 3 years now. Their performance has not been ideal. I think members have had BDO come here and present an update, which has also been frustrating for all of us. And we will have new auditors in KPMG who we're hoping would be auditing the new start of the years. So there is a change happening. Unfortunately, we have reached out to the PSSA. I think the Director of Finance has written to the PSSA. They've also escalated to the partners in the organization. And again, it's the same sort of response that we're having. So it is quite a frustrating aspect to go through. But the government has now issued out this consultation where it's looking to address those backlogs, because again, this is not Haringey again. There's about, I think 60% of local authorities are delayed in one form or another. So it is a really widespread situation across local authority sectors. And the point that you make, Councillor Hymans, is quite important. That's the key risk. The longer this goes on, the higher there's a chance there's something that might have been missed that's not been picked up. And to rectify it would take longer. But unfortunately, our hands are tied. I mean, we can try and explore, because I don't know if that's something we've explored, whether an other sort of audit by someone else can be done. We've had an internal audit that was done by the Mazars. I think we updated the committee on that either last meeting or the meeting before. That provided a significant assurance on how we are running the internal controls. But I'm just mindful, obviously, you've not had. So we do those in the interim basis, just on a test of control. The external audit obviously looks at the account preparation as well, and that's what's been outstanding for a longer time period. So yeah, so we welcome suggestions and we can try and escalate it. But just to mention that, yeah, we have tried quite a lot of things. It's not we've been sitting and accepting the situation. I actually find it quite stressful to have to deal with auditors.
Just very quick one, and perhaps less serious, but we could probably have a look at the attendance details as well, because I think that mine are slightly underreported on this instance in the pack.
That's fine. I mean, this is why we're bringing the report to yourselves. So my hope is you can all read it. If there's any discrepancies you find in the report, please do send them to me in writing. We'll be happy to amend the report before we upload it. So there is a great deal of time, but if I could have it by middle of November, that would be helpful, and then we can upload it by the deadline.
Jim, you want me just to give a bit of context on this? Yeah, I mean, Councillor Bevan is absolutely 100% right, and so is Councillor Hymans about this. Unfortunately, the only thing we can do is exactly what Josephine is doing, and what a 151 officer are doing. There is a bit of context to this, and Tim's right. Carillion. Auditors, remember, audited for years, signed things off in the private sector and the public sector, and then suddenly one of the big four got caught out on Carillion. And, oh, they didn't do the audit properly, whoops. And then more of these came out. This was in the private sector. And so the pressure came on auditors to actually do things. And so they started getting much tougher on local authorities. Now, to answer Craig's question about Tim's accounting team, the team that Anthony runs, I'm pretty sure there'll be no problems there, because my knowledge of local authorities, which goes back to 1982 when I first joined the London Borough of Barnet, is there's external auditors have found very few flaws in local authority accounts in the 40 years that I've been involved. And I doubt I'll find many flaws in the accounts that Anthony and the team have prepared. Doubt it, but of course we don't know that because they're not auditing them. The second issue is we're talking about the PSSA or whatever they call themselves. We used to have the Audit Commission. Some people remember that. I'm sure Councillor Bevan remembers it. And the Audit Commission existed for 30 years until 2010, when it was abolished by the government. And the Audit Commission used to sort of act as an overall body within local authorities for audit, and they appointed the auditors, but they had lots of guidance and lots of sort of scrutiny of all of this, and audits worked in those days as well, and external auditors did their jobs. So that's all I like to say. I think it's a mixture of Carillion and the abolition of the Audit Commission that's brought us to this position. And it's nothing to do with local authorities.
And then Ron.
And then yeah, before that.
So I think we had Councillor Garden first, and then do you want to defer it to Josephine?
Yeah, just to clarify that, you know, even regardless of the backlog, we will be pushing for kind of a strong preference for all the audits to be undertaken properly and in full for each year. Just so.
Just say one last thing. We have this problem in England with LGPS funds. They have less of a problem in Scotland and Wales, and that is because the Scottish government and the Welsh government have said if the auditors can sign off the pension accounts, they don't also have to sign off the council accounts before they can submit it. In England, you have to have both signed off. So what's happened is the Scheme Advisory Board wrote to Lee Rowley, who's the present minister for the LGPS, and Lee Rowley has said in writing that he's working with the officials within the ministry to try and sort this out so you can have a separate sign off. That hasn't come through yet. If it does, then we could have these problems solved and Craig's issue be solved, that we could have the pension signed off even though the councils weren't. Let's hope Lee Rowley acts on what he said he'll do.
Councillor Garden.
Thanks. Sorry, mine is a less important question really. The front page, Tim. I was wondering if the cover of this document, could we have a better picture of Ali Pali? If that is what you meant to put there. I'm sorry, it's less serious, but I think nevertheless, I don't think it's a very good picture and doesn't give a good impression of the performance of the fund, so to speak.
I welcome that feedback, Councillor. If you could share some ideas of what you consider would be a good picture,
Or
I'm happy
maybe
to
we
take
could
that on
think
board.
about what that front cover should.
Happy for any suggestions or good artwork from across the borough to be included here. Be happy to include them.
If you don't mind, I have another question, which is slightly more serious. Maybe we come back to this one. Is the I'm sure you've discussed the fund's operational expenses during this time. I mean, obviously it's gone up over the years. Do you think that it's page on the PDF document? It's page 27 out of 94. Administrative and governance costs. Page 21 on the actual, yeah. So if you look at it there, the cost obviously year-on-year costs from 2020, 21 to 2022, 23 has gone up. And I'm just looking at the administrative expenses gone up quite a lot. And do you put that? What do you put that down to? I mean, there is a single expense of administrative software which is quite high. But what do you put that increased cost to? And do you think this is value for money in terms of the costs?
Yes, so I think the primary thing that's driving that really is the admin software costs. So I think last year we did have a procurement in place that led to some increase in cost during the year that were a bit more significant, particularly as we're negotiating a new contract with them. The existing contract was there for quite a while, and I think the new one has been revised and a lot more has been added to it. Over that year as well, because of the changes we had in the team, we actually had a high level of interim staff in the team. They tend to be a lot more expensive than permanent staff. So part of our prioritization last year was trying to get a permanent team in place, which we now do with Jamie. I think we have maybe one vacancy. So that was a key driver. So I would expect in future years for that number to be less. But yeah, I think that was the primary thing driving those costs, particularly in that period.
Councillor Hymas, did you have a question?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of related. But I mean, obviously, like, we're under a lot of budget pressure at the moment this year. So I know that you no doubt will have been under pressure. But at the same time, I can see that our percentage completed within the service level agreements, that's on page 28. I mean, especially like some of them are quite low, like letter dealing and transfer and quote. I wonder if you could say something about like why that's so low and whether you think that next year it would be higher in terms of those percentages.
Yeah, so it is somewhat related to the point I made earlier about us having a lot of interim staff. So when we did have that situation in place, we actually had probably more than 60% of the team leave around the same time. And as you do when you go through a period of not having people in post, some of the things did start to slip. So one of the key things we've been able to do in the team is actually procure some software that allows us to be able to identify the different cases, do different case management. So we are actually able to identify what is being prioritized and what isn't. And one of the key things that came out of here is this transfer in. We used to have one person who used to be the key person doing those transfers. And when they went through a period of not being around, that work was left behind. So when Jamie and the team have come in, we've redesigned that process to have that shared around the pensions officers. So effectively, we would be expecting this task to improve. It's something that me and Jamie are managing on a monthly basis, understanding what is driving those those delays, because 30 days is something we should be able to do, to be frankly honest with you. So what we're going to start doing is bring some of those updates to the pensions committee so you guys can monitor that as well, because I think it gives you a requirement to see how the scheme is performing as a whole. So we are designing a report that will go in Jamie's update report, where we'll be able to highlight these on a quarterly basis rather than just annually. So it is something we're focused on, and yes, that performance is not good for members.
Craig.
Chair, Tim, I just want to close out my point on the audit. There's nothing here that causes me to believe there's an inaccuracy in the financial data. However, I don't believe it's reasonable for us to keep saying we're going to wait. And a reasonable question to us by the members is like, when in the face of an industry that is not providing what you need, what have you done? And we need to answer that question. So I think, and I request, that I think it's reasonable that the executive proposes some alternative framework and the cost that might entail, and bring it to the forum and we can discuss it. But I do believe that an alternative framework can be established, and I request that one is brought for consideration. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. We're happy to take that under consideration. I'll consult with Josephine and the Director of Finance. Yeah, we're happy to see if there's another solution that we can push forward on behalf of the Pensions Committee and Board.
And Councillor Burton.
So how is this report made available? Is it purely on the website? And then do members get some communication either on their pensions slip or their whatever way we're communicating with them? How do they get told that it's available to see? And then if it's designed purely for the website, well, fair enough. If it's designed also to be read in hard copy, this text size doesn't meet the relevant legal guidelines, because the legal guidelines for government text documents is what is used on the cabinet papers. That's a government requirement that public documents. So I'm just raising that issue. That's the first issue. And then the second point is, it refers to disputes on page 13. I'm just wondering, have we had any disputes between a pensioner claimant and the fund? And should we put perhaps no disputes or 3 disputes or whatever?
So I think on the first question, I would say, yeah, it is designed to go on the website. We do not print this out to share with members. It's purely to be accessed from the website, and which is why the recommendation is for us to upload it. In the past, I'm not sure what we've done at Haringey, given that we haven't had an audited one for a while, but we're happy to send communications around to members for them to be informed on how the scheme is performing. It's not just designed for the members, it's designed for everybody. So hence why it's in a publicly available format on the website, but we're happy to send some communication to members if they're interested in reading this. I will take your point around the government guidelines. I'm not entirely sure. I think this report was made with Haringey guidelines for all their reports, but I'm happy to double check that and make sure that we are compliant. In terms of complaints, maybe Jamie will be able to help me on this one, on internal disputes. I'm not sure if we've had any in the year included.
No, so we haven't had any IDRPs come in the last year. So that's why none being recorded on the report.
You can state that and state it in that paragraph.
Yeah, no, happy to take that as an action and include that paragraph to say, no IDRPs have been received in the app.
Do we have any other questions on this? So I have a question. Just going back to Craig and Councillor Bevan and all your points about this not being audited. I'm guessing we do have a contract with someone about it being audited. I don't know if it's with the PSSA or directly with BDO, but usually in a contract. So if I want to buy John's car and then he doesn't give me his car, I don't pay you the money. If we haven't been audited for 3 years, where's the money?
I mean, I don't know about the terms of the service contract between the council and BDO that would have been dealt with by the contracts team. But I think there is something to be said to look at the contract to see there's a breach of that contract. And I think it's been raised before, but I don't know what's happened in that point.
Yes, it has been raised in the past, and I think it is fair that they are in breach of that, but all that is set up by the PSSA. They're the ones who are the enforcing body on this, which is why we would write to the PSSA and ask whether they can either give us a different auditor, look into it. And so far, that's not been a fruitful exercise for us. But I think the agreement is based on the PSSAs. They make the actual appointments themselves.
So can we put it as an action to speak to the contracts team or whoever the relevant people is, just because I think we're losing money on this for basically nothing really, whether it comes from the PSSA or BDO. I think something needs to be done about this.
Yes, no, again, take that as an action. We'll consult the relevant teams and provide a further update to the Pensions Committee and Board.
If there's no other questions on this, the actions for this item is to note the draft pensions fund annual accounts and the unaudited accounts for 2022 to 2023. Is that noted first? Yeah. And then it's to approve the draft version of the Haringey Pension Fund's annual report to be uploaded to the Haringey Pensions Fund website by the 1st December 2023. Is that approved? And I know Tim's asked for guidance of any changes that and any nice pictures that we can put at the front of the pack. So yeah, do get in touch with Tim about that. Cool. Thank you very much. So moving on to item 11, and it's you again, Tim.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So item 11 is the open consultation on LGPS next steps on investments. So prior to this meeting, we did have a workshop session where we talked through some of the key points that have been included in this consultation. Again, this is to reiterate to members that the consultation is still open. We invite your comments. It is publicly available. I will be sharing a link after this meeting for members to read. And if there are any particular comments or concerns that have been raised in the consultation that you would like to be included in the Haringey response, please do send those to me in writing, and I'll do my best to incorporate them in the response on behalf of the Pensions Committee and Board and Haringey. So essentially for the recommendations for this, it is one to note the summary of the policy, which I will not go through in detail now, given we've had a session on it. But again, if there's anything someone else would want to raise, I'm happy to welcome that. But the recommendation is effectively to delegate authority to myself to draft a response on behalf of Haringey. In that response, I'll be consulting with the independent advisor and also with the chairs or with the chair of the Pensions Committee and Board before that is submitted to DLAC. A final copy of the response will be shared with members prior to that submission to invite any further comments and to make sure that all the views have been captured accordingly. So that's the only thing I want to raise on that one, and happy to defer back to you, Chair.
Is there any questions regarding this?
I just wanted, Tim, do you want to expand kind of the deadlines in which you want to give responses and, yeah?
So I will set out the deadlines in writing, but ideally it would be helpful I will be planning to send a response to members by the 22nd of February for your initial comments. And if I would have responses back by the 27th, that will give us enough time to incorporate any changes and put them in for submission, hopefully by the 29th. And if not, we'll submit it by Monday, the 2nd of October.
Councillor Ngoran.
Tim, what format are you going to send this out? Are they going to be like a yes, no question? Like, how we discussed, do you agree to this? Yes. I just want to try to understand because I think open formats are not going to be objective, I think.
I think we've had quite a robust discussion earlier. So my consideration will be to draft those into a response. So it will be written text that outlines and captures the nature of that discussion we've had. For members, it will be to comment on that. So essentially, you could just be fine with it and say, we're happy with this. Or you could say, Tim, you've not gone strong enough on this point. Can we highlight it a bit more? And I can incorporate that into the text and share another version, which is why there is a need for that time period to change. It won't be a questionnaire. I think that would be hard to capture into a final response. So I will draft that and share it.
The report, this series of specific questions, and so you've got a framework to put your answers against those questions, which I assume is what you do.
Councillor Hymas.
Have you had discussions with pension managers and other boroughs about collective responses to this? Or is it more that each borough is kind of doing their own thing?
There have been a lot of discussions on this since it was published. As you imagine, this is a highly interesting proposal from the government, and a lot of people wanted to get an understanding of what these requirements mean longer term, but also because of the length of the document, it's very likely that you might miss out on certain points, and it's good to share those with colleagues across other councils. So yeah, we've had discussions with other pensions officers. I understand there's been discussions at a Section 151 level director as well. And just earlier this week, the London Civ had their conference, and that was also discussed quite in depth. We also had a similar workshop where people around the table were giving their views around what some of those concerns are. I've also been engaging directly with a few colleagues to also get some of the sense of their feeling of what was going to be included in the responses. As you can imagine, this is highly exempt and confidential stuff, so we won't be able to get those final drafts. But over this month, you start seeing committees approve those drafts, and some of them will be made public. Again, you can take a bit of a steer from that. But there is interest from across, especially the London Fund, to have a more collective responses on the key issues that we find to be of concern. And I think that is something that will feature through. And I think, as John has mentioned, he's involved with a few other boroughs as well, who will be sharing some of our thinking with as well.
Yeah, just in my experience of government consultations, they tend to be most powerful when, a lot of stakeholders are saying the same thing because they get grouped together into one set of responses. So if we can make sure that there's like alignment where possible, that would be effective, I think.
Yeah, and I'm going to be away, but I'll be happy to accelerate the timetable so that it can allow us time to share that with others if members will find that helpful in terms of the collective responses. But again, yeah, there's quite a lot of discussions we've had on this. And I think some of the views that we actually shared earlier today are widely shared. They're not unique to Haringey. They're shared by quite a lot of people in the sector.
If there's no other questions, we'll move on to the recommendations. So the first one is to note the summary of the policy proposals included in the consultation, included in section 6 of the report, and provide comments and feedback to assist officers in drafting a response to the consultation. Is that noted? Yeah. And then the second recommendation is to delegate authority to the head of pensions and treasury to draft and submit the consultation response on behalf of the Haringey Pensions Fund in consultation with the independent advisor and the chair of the pensions committee and board. A copy of the final response will be circulated to members before submitting it to the DLUHC. Is that approved? Approved? Yes. Okay. Agreed. Perfect. So moving on to item 12, it's you again, Tim, on the risk register update.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, again, a standing report on risk register. So again, this is to provide a portion of the risk register for members to provide any comments on the risks and whether they feel that the scoring is appropriate or anything differently needs to be done or any other areas of further attention from either officers or other advisors. So again, just to advise members that the focus for this meeting is the accounting related risks. I think we have discussed the annual report earlier. Some of those risks have already been raised, but again, this is an opportunity for members to just go through the list of the risks that we have identified. So there could be some risks that we have overlooked. We welcome feedback on that, but also to look at the scoring in terms of whether you feel the way we're managing those risks is appropriate. In section 6.5, which is on page 64 of this paper, we've highlighted some of the other key reports which are not necessarily accounting delay related, but also feature within the overall risk register. So I think there's a summary of the risk register that's been included, but it doesn't go into the detail of how we're scoring that. In the first row is still the highest risk that we've identified in the risk, which is the risk of inflation remaining elevated. We are seeing inflation starting to come down, but it still remains higher than it's been for a number of years now. The key concern for us was initially that if inflation was to stay at these current levels, it would lead to income constraints within the portfolio. We had a session earlier in the year on that. We found that the increase would actually not be that meaningful based on the contribution rates that's been set by the actuary. So the impact of inflation now is more on the asset performance. So do we feel that the investments are in our asset, in our investment strategy are actually appropriate for a sustained inflation environment? Again, we'll be providing an update on this. If we see inflation coming down a lot sooner, that I mean central banks will do something different with their interest rate policies, which will also be of interest to the Pensions Committee and Board. So again, that's why we still have that risk. There's one of the highest one. And then the other one, which we've discussed already in further detail, is the delay of the publication of the statement of accounts. And again, just to emphasize that there are 3 years of audits currently outstanding. And yes, we're trying to do some things, but also take members' comments on doing a bit more to ensure that this issue is resolved as soon as possible. And then the final risk is on the increasing risk of a market downturn, which, to be honest with you, changes from month to month, depending on what's happening in the economy. But it's just pointing out that that's something we are monitoring. And if members do feel there's something that we need to do dramatically or significant in the portfolio, we again welcome those views from members. So that's all I wanted to highlight, Chair, and happy to open up for questions.
Is there any questions regarding this report? No. So the only recommendation is for this is to note the report. Are we happy to note it? Yeah. Over to item 13 then. That's the LAPFF update report. That's you again, Tim.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So again, this is the Local Authority Pension Fund Forum update. It effectively summarizes their work over the quarter and some of the engagement they've been doing with various companies across the globe. So again, just remind members that LAP is we are a member of LAP and they engage on our behalf. They directly participate in shareholder meetings. They try and engage with companies to make sure that they're effecting a positive change and also having best practice within their organization. So the only thing to highlight is during the quarter, LAP engaged with 84 companies in more than 10 jurisdictions. Again, I highlight to members that they do have a quarterly report that's always on the website. It does make for an interesting read and goes into details on some of the case studies of the work that they're doing. Normally we do issue or we do summarize the voting alerts that were sent to us during the quarter. This particular quarter, I hope members will be okay with this. We haven't produced the list. There were 40 voting alerts that were issued. It does take some time to go through all of those and find out how they did. But if it is of interest to members, I'm happy to organize for that information to be made available. It would have just taken a lot of space and time to go through, so we didn't include it this time. But if that is of interest, we're happy to also share that. On the chat below, it just shows the nature of the engagement and the outcomes. And you can see that the biggest response is in dialogue, which means that they are talking to these companies, and that's something they do with the voting alerts. If you look at quite a number of the alerts, they are to encourage them to have reports on climate transition, have that on their boards. Some companies, depending on the nature of their business, may be a bit reluctant, but we are seeing a trend of companies actually starting to take this serious, in part due to the engagement of LAP and other similar organizations. So again, just a high level update, and happy to open that to any particular questions from members.
Councillor Ngaran.
So it's a slightly broader question, not specifically about LAF, but essentially under carbon and climate change, we've said Haringey Pension Fund is committed to being a responsible investor. Now, the question I have, and I've posed this before, how do we objectively demonstrate that? I mean, is it just words, or actually can we objectively say these are the things that we're doing, demonstrating that we are a responsible investor?
Yes, so I think Councillor Bevan has asked a similar question as well in the past. And effectively in the past, Haringey has made a number of decisions that are more looking at the best alternatives. So a good case in point is going into the low carbon investment funds a few years back. But it also has this LAP standing where we get the voting alerts and we pass them on to the managers. That's a way of us trying to have a say and making sure that the managers vote in light of what we would like. It doesn't always work, but it has proved to be quite effective. And sometimes you do get a summary from the investment manager as to why they voted differently from LAP. And then the final bit is also on the renewable infrastructure stuff that we have done, investing in renewable infrastructure to try and go into more assets that are supporting the climate transition. I think your point is well made, and it's something that we've included in the forward plan, that we do need to have a framework of how those decisions are made. It can't just be this the best investment that's around at the time. There has to be a principled strategy or statement that we can put out there, and it's clear not only to the committee and board of what those responsible criteria is, but also to any asset managers when we're making selections, so they know exactly what the values for the organization are. So again, I welcome feedback from members as to when exactly that should happen. I think the plan wants to do that around October time, when we do a bit of the asset review. So we set out what those values are. It won't be a one-time thing. It's something that will be an evolving piece, but I think we need to have that initial basis of what those values are before we start going forward. So yeah, I'm happy to welcome any feedback on that, on how important that is for members and whether that's something that should be prioritized in terms of our working group meetings.
If there's no other questions, are we happy to note this document? Yep, sure. Moving on to item 14, which is the forward plan. Tim, this is you again.
Again, right. So the final item on this public agenda is item 14, the forward plan. Again, this is to invite members' comments on what's been included in the plan, what we are planning to do over the foreseeable future, and again, to invite any comments from yourselves on whether we can make any amendments or whether you're happy with the plan. Any comments are welcome. So again, in section 6.6, which is on page 81, it just provides a summary of what we've done so far, which is the cash flow review. So we can almost mark that as checked. There is then the setting investment objectives, which again, we've briefly discussed. So this is looking at our investment objectives, but also looking at that responsible investment criteria. Before we sort of set the investment strategy, we might want to set what that objective we are investing against is. So again, to the points that have been raised earlier in the evening around understanding what the target return the portfolio should aim for, what level of risk we are comfortable with taking on, or whether we want to do something separately in terms of how we're managing that investment risk. But I think a key part of that process has been to be looking at responsible investment goals and criteria that the committee can set for the fund, and that we can work together with our advisors to implement in terms of that transition. So one of the things I've highlighted here is we'll be looking to set that for a 3 to 5 year period, which is kind of linked to the triennial evaluation, but also allows enough time for that investment strategy to start doing some work before we do any quick changes. So again, I think we're aiming for that to be presented at the December meeting, which would suggest that having a workshop in between that to be able to get those ideas and then make some proposals and present some proposals to the committee and board. The final bit is again on agreeing the investment strategy statement. I think comments have been made earlier that the wider review may not have happened for a number of years. So again, once we've got those targets in place, We'll then do a high-level review of the entire portfolio, understand the risk measures, understand what the current opportunities are, and hopefully be able to implement them as quickly as we can. So I think that's the high-level plan, but again, I welcome comments from members on that. Just a final thing to point out that the training plan that we've included as an appendix, and if members, if there are any particular topics that they would like us to present, I think some have been suggested on the LGPS member self-service portal, which we're happy to run sessions for members on. But if there are any other ideas, feel free to raise them now or write to us in writing, and we'll consider those and put them into a timeline.
Do we have any questions for this report? No? Are we happy to know the progress made towards the agreed key priorities outlined in section 6 of this report, specifically in relation to the investment strategy review work? Yeah. Do you identify any additional matters or training requirements for inclusion within the Pensions Committee and Board's forward plan? No? Okay, so there's no new items of urgent business, and the dates for the future meetings are listed. The next future meeting will be the 4th of December. And with that, that's the end of the public meeting. So we will be now considering items 18 to 20, which contain exempt information. We'll be moving to exclude the press and public for the remainder of the meeting to consider this exempt information as defined under paragraphs 3 and 5, part 1, schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972. Is the exclusion of the press and public for these items agreed by members? If anyone has any comments or objections to this, please speak now. Otherwise, I will take this as agreed. This has been agreed. Thank you. That marks the end of the public section of this meeting. We will pause while the recording of the meeting stops. We will restart the exempt part of this meeting in a few minutes. Thank you.